when you had Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State,
Mm-hmm.
one of the most powerful positions in the world
Mm-hmm.
as well, right up there. You're not president, but you were real close
Colin
to that.
Powell.
As
Mm-hmm.
you got ahead of me. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly where I
Mm-hmm.
was going next. And Colin
Yeah.
Powell was considered not just
Clarence
the
Thomas.
highest military. Why you gotta mess it up? Why?
I'm sorry.
I should apologize for that.
This is Discourse with Daryl and Demetria, a continuation of our conversations on the Diversity Different podcast.
In this episode of Discourse, we discuss what it means to be effective in positions of power, whether simply being in the room is enough or if true impact requires challenging the system. Let's talk.
So as we talk about effectiveness, talk a little bit more about that period you were just talking about where you get in the door and you're just keeping your head down. What were your thoughts about that? And how did that look with regards to effectiveness?
You know, I've heard the mantra, and I know you have too. When you get in there, you keep your head down and you work hard, and that's how you advance, right? You don't make any waves. And so I've had people that in high powered places that I ask that very question of, how did you get to where you are? And at least two people who, I consider mentors in some way, they may not know that or agree, but at least two of those people told me that they didn't make waves. Like that is how they got where they are in the position that they are, that they had a certain political and social will that they had to bend to, and they had to be okay with doing that. And that's, I think, one of those conversations when I realized I'm probably not going to be good in politics, or I probably wouldn't be good in certain positions because I just don't know that I'd be able to do that.
Or maybe you just wouldn't have been good in the 1960s, right? If you were being put in
These are people
positions.
talking about
Right.
like in the last 20, 30 years. One of the people that I'm talking about, he's a general counsel for a hospital, and that's not even that high level. I mean, it's high level,
Right.
but I'm talking about in the last 15, 20 years, this man said this. Like his ascension to that position was in the last 15, 20 years. It's not like we talking about the 1960s. I'm talking about there are people who still feel like that they're now not able to make waves. Now he's in the boomer generation in that position. I think it comes with that generation's mentality more.
Right.
But I think that there are people who still ascend to their positions of power by not making waves, and they'd have to be honest about that.
And that goes back to the question that we're starting with, right? Effective. And is it effective if that person has to, one, be something different than what they suggest they would naturally be? And number
Mhm.
two, if they act that way, then does that lend credence later to the mad Black woman or the mad Black man? Because that earlier person kept their head down and made no waves, right?
I think that there are these very nuanced pieces of effectiveness, because you could say that the same thing about policy, right? Like if you're in that position and you're doing nothing but occupying that position,
Mm.
and you're not changing anything for anyone else or opening doors or changing policy or pushing policy, then is that effective? Yes, it's effective in changing what leadership might look like. But if that change in what leadership looks like has no other impact, is that effective?
Are you just occupying a position? If you're just occupying a position, is it effective? Because nobody else is going to be able to come in and do just you. If you just keeping your head down and just occupying a position, are they going to be able to come in and enhance the culture?
Mhm. I think we all have a different sense of responsibility in that. I think some of us do feel like being in the position is enough. And I can almost understand that way of thinking as well, right? That if white male comes into a position of power, all they have to do is be themselves.
Be.
All they have to do is lead. That's it. That's it. And that's a luxury. That's a privilege. So I understand the desire to just want to do that. So I don't necessarily judge the people who do that. I just don't know outside of the representation how effective that is in the way that we're talking about, right? But some would say just by being in that position, by being an example, by getting people used to the idea of diverse leadership, for example, that's doing something, right? It's almost like the Obama thing. It makes me think about that. I used to defend Obama quite a bit to Black people specifically who would say stuff like, Obama didn't do anything for Black people. And one, I think we could disagree on the merits for that. But I do think that there was an approach that Obama had to have in order to occupy that space as the first, right?
Yeah.
And maybe him being in that position. Now, we could talk about the backlash and whether we still think that that was a good idea, because I got some different perspective on that. But with him being, while occupying the position, was it enough that he was a Black president? And, I think we could disagree on that. But I think one thing that we have to admit that position and being in those kinds of position is extremely hard and a mental weight that I don't think most people are prepared to deal with, and that most people who haven't been in that position can really understand. So I defend those people on some level, but also with the caveat that maybe that isn't the best circumstance for effectiveness.
There are different levels and assessment of effectiveness. And you're right. That kind of effectiveness is different than the person that changes the entire mentality of the office by the way they come in. And you can't necessarily say that one is better than the other, but you have to at least acknowledge the nuances and differences. So going back to your President Obama example, that was a perfect one for when somebody says he didn't do anything for Black people. I'm always curious, okay, what did you expect he
Sure.
would do for Black people? So let's start with that, right? Like, what was your expectation would happen? That the next day racism would end and that all Black people would have a mansion? That what was your expectation that he would do for Black people when you say he didn't do anything for Black people? So let's start off with that. What was the measurement? And then once they say, something outrageous or outlandish that they expected to have happen, my next question is, so how would you have done that? Right. So let them say, okay, this is how I've done that. Do
Yeah.
you think that
Yeah.
would have passed through the Senate and the House? And do you
Not to
think that
mention
would
not
have?
having the majority in either of those for most of his presidency.
Right.
I
And
don't
so
want
I
to get
want
into an Obama conversation at all.
it has to be part of the discussion about whether it was effective.
A lot of it is this assumption that we are in a post-racial society, and I don't think we were talking about that at all before Obama was president, right? There wasn't even
True.
this consideration that we might be post-racial until Obama got elected. I just don't remember that being a
I don't
conversation,
think
or
it
maybe I
was
wasn't paying attention.
I don't think it was as strong. Clearly, I mean, the president of the
Mhm.
United States of America is arguably the most powerful position in the entire world. So it clearly reached a height when President Obama took office. But I would say it was even out there. Like you heard the dialogue, especially amongst Republicans, when you had Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State,
Mhm.
one of the most powerful positions in the world
Mhm.
as well, right up there. You're not president, but you were real close
Colin
to that.
Powell.
And
Mhm.
you got ahead of me. That's
Mhm.
exactly where I was
Mhm.
going next. And Colin
Yeah.
Powell was considered not just
Clarence
the highest
Thomas.
military. Why you gotta mess it up? Why?
I'm sorry.
You should apologize for that. But Colin Powell wasn't just one of the highest authoritative military figures. He was considered one of the wisest, right? Like there was a
I
lot
miss
of,
him.
I miss him
I know
too. I
and
miss him
people were
too.
mad at the time, but there's just that level of wisdom
Thank you.
and that level of centeredness
Thank
and
you.
temper, I
Thank
think
you.
is needed right now. He could never get accused as being too far left or right,
Right.
in my
He was always
opinion. But
good.
I miss
Yes.
those kinds of voices.
If you haven't had a chance to listen to his autobiography, well worth the time.
Mhm.
Well worth the
I
time.
bet
And
it
it comes with
is.
this idea of DEI milestones goes right to what we just finished talking about, right? Like Colin Powell is a DEI
Mm,
milestone, right? Before
mhm.
the 1960s and the press to get people of color into the military, you would not have had a Colin Powell likely. I think Condoleezza
Absolutely.
Rice is a milestone. And as much as folks want to criticize things back and forth, I'm pretty sure given if we look at the history of America prior to the 60s, you would not have seen, you did not see a Colin Powell or a
Mhm.
Condoleezza Rice.
Mhm.
So we have to
Mhm.
recognize what we're just talking about as part of the milestones, along with the Kenneth Chenaults, right? You don't have a CEO
Mhm.
of a Fortune
Mhm.
500 prior to this. You don't have L. Douglas Wilder, who becomes governor of the state of Virginia, one of the
Mhm.
trenchest states with regards to we will never desegregate. Segregation now, segregation forever. And I know that's not Virginia that said that, but that kind of quote, you don't get
But that
that.
thought
Yeah,
process, yeah.
right. That doesn't happen until the era that we're talking about. So I think we have to
Mhm.
at least recognize that these figures come out of it.
Are these figures just excellence or are they DEI? Like, can we attribute
No.
those successes, those wins to DEI is the question, I
Yes.
guess. Okay, why?
Because absent the agreement DEI put them or helped place them in those locations, you
Mhm.
have to believe that exceptional people didn't exist before then. They were exceptional
Sure.
before they got to those positions. They've been exceptional in whatever they
Right,
did.
but
Well, again, going back to a data standard, unless you see something remotely similar to proportionality, obviously you
okay.
still need some type of treatment. Going back to our cancer
Okay.
analogy, right? Doesn't
Mhm.
look
There's no way to distinguish when you have these prominently successful and excellent people, the Obamas, the Stacey Abrams, just obviously exceptional people. The fact that Stacey Abrams had such success in a run for governor in Georgia, for example. Like Stacey Abrams, I feel like would have been successful no matter what. Obama would have been successful and maybe even president no matter what. And is that the DEI? Can
here's what I
we
want attribute
attribute it to DEI?
yes.
I just
Yes,
okay.
because here's
That's
where I
what I
want you to
want us to
separate
be
out,
able to drill
right?
down on.
Because
Come
I
on.
agree with you. Stacey Abrams, Barack Obama, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and so many others were exceptional people. But
Mhm.
there were folks that were exceptional before them that
Mhm.
never got those opportunities, right? And that's where I want to make sure we understand that exceptional people did not start in the 60s. And the fact that they didn't get those opportunities in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s. They did not have those chances. They were still there. I would go back to, again, probably the most powerful Black person that's ever existed in this world, Barack Obama. Today, the only reason he gets the chance to be elected president is because he's at Harvard Law and becomes editor in chief of Harvard Law Review. He doesn't get that without them going out and being diverse, the DEI thing. Like
Sure.
they don't, he's not there. And but for that,
Mhm.
he's at Howard or more, he's at a bunch of other schools that, and I'm not even talking about the desegregation thing. I'm just talking about them saying, you can go back to Derek Bell and his whole history at Harvard and how much fighting he had to do at Harvard to bring in a Black
Mhm.
woman and this whole thing. But for Barack Obama being perfect, Harvard Law
Mhm.
Review, he
Mhm.
ain't running for
He wouldn't have been
president.
president.
He would
Thank
not have
you.
been president.
Okay. So that's what I wanted to tease out because I think that you have this climate where it's like we've already got the voting rights amendments. We already, even though they've gutted that shit, and
Yep.
we've already got, that those things were enough.
People are excellent no matter what. And what I don't want people to think is that the individual, like a Barack Obama, like Condoleezza Rice, it wasn't that DEI made them. They were already made. They
Mhm.
were already
Or
excellent.
that
They
it
were already,
was required, right?
but it was required not for them. It was required
Mhm.
for society. It wasn't about
Mm.
them
Mhm.
eating DEI. It was about society being able to see beyond the problems that had been ingrained from the Constitution. They were going to
Mhm.
be exceptional, and there was exceptional people before them that were doing the exact same
Ooh.
level of high work. It was that society could not see them, and DEI says, "Hey, open your eyes."
It's like the conversation we were having earlier, right? It's like DEI forces you to look past white
Uh,
supremacy.
uh, keep talking.
Is
Preach on.
that what I think I think
Preach
that
on.
that's what it does, right? Is that maybe a Stacey Abrams, maybe a Barack Obama get overlooked when the mentality is and has always been white is right, that white is better, that these voices matter more, they're more valid. All of our scholars, all of our educators, everything that we know is associated with whiteness. And so excellence, how that can so easily get overlooked if it isn't immediate conforming to those norms and that whiteness. If our scores or our scoring doesn't immediately conform to our mainstream ideals of merit and excellence, but there's still all this innate beauty, excellence, and mastery in this person anyway, right? So I like thinking about DEI, affirmative action policies, as all being tools to push past white supremacy. It pushes us to look beyond those mainstream values and culture to be inclusive and equitable and diversified from those things, right?
Right there, right there, right? It goes back to last show, fish climbing a tree. It allows us to look past that expectation that fish better climb the hell out that tree. It allows us to move. And I appreciate the second part when you said it even more than the first part, because the first part is you said DEI forces us to. And I wish DEI could force us to do something, but I don't think it actually forces anything, but I think it at least provides a tool that helps.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Discourse. You can catch the full conversation that sparked this one on the Diversity Different podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.